What is up, everyone? Welcome to the first episode of Rough Drafts. My name is Sam Pratt, also known as Samp or Sam P. And yeah, welcome to the first episode. This is my first foray into making magic content like this. Really my first foray into making any kind of content like this, podcasting. So we're going to see how this goes. I won't belabor the point with introductions, but I do want to talk about my vision for this podcast. I think there's some more room in the limited content space for more short form limited content, hitting like the 20-30 minute mark, and content that focuses on very specific topics, sort of like a complement to the bigger, more format overview centric podcasts that are out there now, like Lords of Limited or Limited Resources. So I'm planning on getting really in the weeds on things, bringing like a grab bag of limited related topics each week. So like deep dives on various archetypes or decks, in-depth looks at very specific cards, hoping to take a look at things that you might have missed or don't understand. So let's get into it. So I want to talk about my own drafting philosophy. I believe pretty strongly that draft is closer to an art than a science. And what I mean by that is I don't believe that there is an optimal route for navigating a given draft. I think there are many viable different paths you could take in a given draft. And I think that understanding the impacts of the decisions you make is just as important as trying to seek out the optimal path that you feel like you should be going down. I'm going to read a quote from pro player Andrew Ellenbogen. It was a tweet from quite a few years ago at this point. "Competitive magic is the art of correctly generalizing from sample sizes too small to draw real conclusions." I think it mostly applies to constructed, but I think it's really interesting to think in terms of limited, especially because limited's in a pretty interesting place right now because we do have a real sample size. We have the 17 lands data. Just to be clear, I love the data. I use it all the time. I'm sure I'm going to be referencing it quite a bit. I think that people also misconstrue what it is they're learning from 17 lands. 17 lands is a fantastic resource for card evaluation. And it's a fantastic source of information. You can get up to speed on the story of a format really quickly just by looking over the deck win rates and the individual card win rates. So it's really good for honing your card evaluation and adjusting it for each particular format. But the point of limited isn't just to rank the cards. It's not just to be able to say this is the best card in this draft format or this card is better than this card in this draft format. The win rate data for the cards is information, but it doesn't directly translate to a pick order. At least I don't believe it does. So I think that once you have a foothold in the format and the data is amazing for that, your own experience is just as valuable, if not more, than what the data is providing. And trusting your gut with good strategic reasoning is generalizing from small sample sizes. And I think leaning into your own preferences, leaning into your own experiences with the cards, with the data helping inform your knowledge of the format is really crucial for mastering a limited format and going really deep. So you're using the data to get a big picture of the format, and you're building on that big picture with your own experience and merging that with your own playstyle and preferences. Okay, I'm going to get specific more in the vibe of what I'm actually going for in this podcast now. We're going to talk about starting column. So I know Aetherdrift is about to leave. Tarkir comes out about a week from when I'm expecting this podcast to release. But I want to start with an Aetherdrift topic. One, because it's good practice for me to talk about something that I know about already as a first-time podcaster. And two, because I actually think I can tie this topic pretty nicely in with Tarkir. And I think I have something interesting to offer talking about multicolor in general. So let's talk starting column. So going into Aetherdrift, I knew that blue-black and blue-white were going to have a lot of overlap. Obviously because they both cared about artifacts, but also just because a lot of their gold uncommons were really splashable. So that would be Haunt the Network, Voyage Home, and what is it called? Guidelight Pathmaker, the 6-drop vehicle. So I was kind of already thinking that if I first pick a Haunt the Network, I would probably want to try to pick up some of the Esper lands. So like the blue-white or black-white land to try to splash, say, Voyage Home or some other Artifacts Matters cards. What I didn't clock going into the format was there are a lot of good gold rares in Aetherdrift and a lot of good gold rares specifically in Esper. So on day one of Aetherdrift, I had a draft where I got absolutely hooked up with the Esper gold rares. I took a Haunt early, and then I think I got past all three of the Esper gold rares. That would be Mendicant Core, Zahur, and Winter. And as I was navigating that draft, it kind of clicked for me mid-draft. It was like, oh, I could really go for some starting columns right here. Because my card quality was really high. I really just wanted to cast my spells. And what I realized mid-draft was, oh, starting column's an artifact. So that also fits in with my artifact synergies. And I did really well with that deck. And doing that well with basically a full 3-color deck on day one of the format really set the tone for how I was approaching the early days. And I started taking starting column a lot higher. And I did have a lot of success with these non-green multicolor piles, which my friends and I affectionately dubbed shit piles, which was basically our term for any dirtily looking control deck that was splashing a whole bunch of rares. And yeah, we were doing really well with it. It doesn't have to exclude green. You can have green in it, but kind of the first couple of weeks of the format, green wasn't super open for me, at least how I was approaching the format. So colloquially, shit pile is non-green, but green can be included. To talk through starting columns specifically, there's a couple reasons why it's a really cool card in this format. One is that Manolith is just kind of good in a slower, splashier format like Aetherdrift. A couple other synergistic things that has going for it. It's an artifact, and there's 2 color pairs that care about artifacts. It starts your engines, and once you hit max speed, it discards cards. That's basically everything that a non-green, non-aggro deck would care about in Aetherdrift. So it really ties the room together, can prop up a lot of your synergies there. Some specific notes for building decks with Manoliths in them. Manoliths love 1-drops, and they also love 5-drops. So Manoliths are great with 1-drops because you can cast them the turn that you play the Manolith. So on turn 3, you can play starting column and then cast a 1-drop. And they also love 5-drops because they accelerate you to 5 mana. And specifically, they work really well with defensive 1-drops. So I'm talking like interaction spells. So that you can play them the turn that you cast starting column, and basically spend 4 mana on turn 3 immediately. So Bounce Off, for example, is a fantastic reactive 1-drop that you can play. You can fit an Engine Rat in there if you happen to draw it past turn 1, or maybe you spent turn 1 playing a tap land. Road Rage. What else is there? Grim Bauble is another great one. So any kind of defensive 1-drop. In terms of 5-drops, Aetherdrift has a couple really good ones at common in Broadcast Rambler and Thunderhead Gunner. I mean, it should be pretty obvious why ramping to 5 mana and immediately getting to spend that 5 mana on turn 4 is good. So don't have to go too far deep into 5-drops. Just touching on what a quote unquote shit pile is, or like a starting column control deck. Because they get to play so many colors, they have really high card quality. So when you have really high card quality, you really don't mind going up on mana sources. So if you have like 2 starting columns in your deck and you're running 19 mana sources, that's fantastic because you just want to cast your cards. And in the late game, if you manage to hit max speed, which isn't too hard in these decks often, starting column sacrificing itself is a card advantage spell. Now, it's not technically a card advantage spell because you have to draw 2, then discard 1, and you lose your mana source. But, late in the game, you can pitch your worst spell or land. You get to choose, it'll be fine. White was really well positioned for these starting column control decks in Aetherdrift. Now, I know white was definitely the worst color in Aetherdrift, but it was really high ceiling. It had really good rares and also had good gold cards. I'm thinking like the white black one, Embalmed Descendant, was really good. I really liked Voyage Home. And on top of having really good uncommons and rares, white also got what I thought were the two best non-rare removal spells in Gallant Strike and Ride's End, which lined up perfectly against what green was doing. I want to go back and talk about rares specifically. I think rares are really important to these control decks. And I mean, obviously a good rare is going to be great for your limited deck, but I think it's worth noting that sets these days, kind of since Play Boosters started last year, they make a lot of gold rares, and they're often pretty good. And I think that if your draft is not going in a clear direction and you can pick up fixing early, there's a lot of benefit to kind of salvaging a draft that doesn't have a direction by picking up powerful cards that other people can't cast. And I think this is a strategy that's gotten better since Play Boosters, and something that I feel like should be talked about a little bit more and is definitely going to be relevant come Tarkir. So now that I've gone over what I like about Starting Column, I want to talk about the two types of multicolor decks that I drafted in Aetherdrift. And I think this paradigm is actually pretty useful, just talking about multicolor decks in Limited in general. So I think there's two ways to think about multicolor. Either you're a 3-color deck or you're a 2-color deck that's splashing. So I think these are slightly different. In Aetherdrift, these 3-color decks were 3 colors because they were taking advantage of adjacent synergies. So 2 color pairs that shared a synergistic theme. So for example, Esper Artifacts is a great example for this because both blue-black and blue-white cared about artifacts in Aetherdrift. Playing Esper was a great way to get more Artifact Matters cards in your decks. Other examples of this in Aetherdrift were like Mardu cared about Start Your Engines. Temur cared about Exhaust. So for example, you could think of an Esper deck in Aetherdrift that is heavy blue and then splashing both Haunt the Network and Voyage Home. Or you could think of like a base green deck with red exhaust cards and then it's also playing like Ranger's Refueler in blue, as well as like it's probably playing like a Bounce Off. So these full 3-color decks, I was really approaching from a synergy perspective in Aetherdrift, and they have to be centered in a single color to make your mana work. What I mean by that is you have most of your cheap cards being cards of a single color so that you can still play cheap cards on curve. And then when you hit 3 mana and play your Starting Column, then you've unlocked all your colors, or you draw your tapped gain lands or your Night Market, and your mana sorts itself out as the game goes on because your more expensive ones are the splash cards. Now, on the other hand, the other way to approach multicolor is you're a very strong 2-color base and you're splashing multiple cards of other colors. So I have an example that I drafted in the early days of the format where I was a base red-white deck. So I had multiple Cloudspire coordinators in the 2 slot. I had, good like Lightning Strike, Ride's End, good red-white curve, just very solid mid-range deck. And then my mana was really good because I was playing a couple Starting Columns and a Marshall's Pathcruiser. And then I was able to splash independently powerful cards. I had a Voyage Home. I actually splashed Haunt the Network in this red-white deck, which is really funny to tell people. But, my mana, it did work out there. So these 2-color base decks were much more focused on card quality. So I had already been prioritizing fixing during the draft, and then I found an open lane, but still had good cards to splash and also the fixing to do so. So my deck was a good combination of consistent and powerful. And I'm kind of hand waving things like, how do you navigate into this during the draft? Like what an exact number of sources is, like what a deck like this specifically looks like, because we are moving to Tarkir next week. And I actually think it's interesting to translate this paradigm of full 3-color versus 2-color plus multiple splashes into Tarkir. Obviously, Tarkir is a full 3-color set. There are there's some expectation that people are regularly going to be playing 3-color decks. But on the other hand, they've also supported themes into the 2-color enemy pairs. So, for example, you could be Temur, which is red, blue, green, or you could be Sultai, which is black, blue, green. They've also added blue-green cards that care about cards leaving the graveyard, which both the Temur and the Sultai mechanics remove cards from your graveyard. So I think while you can be a base blue 3-color Temur deck, you could also start your draft pretty split between green and blue. And while you might be more inclined to pick up some Temur cards during the draft, you could open a great Sultai rare and presumably figure out the fixing to be base 2 colors and then splashing that great Sultai rare on top of a couple Temur cards. I don't know exactly how that's going to work because Tarkir is not out yet, but I think that's something I'm going to be thinking about going in. And it's interesting that in Aetherdrift, it was the 3-color decks that were really synergistic, and the 2-color decks that were splashing multiple cards for me, that was kind of like a raw card quality deck. Versus in Tarkir, I think the 2-color decks are going to be really synergistic, and the 3-color decks are going to be more raw card quality. I love building multicolor decks. I'm really excited for tinkering with mana bases in Tarkir next week. So I'm going to leave this episode here. Thanks for listening. I hope this was entertaining to you. I hope you got something out of it. I hope you're looking forward to my next episode next week when I start covering Tarkir. Once again, my name is Sam Pratt. If you have any feedback for me or want to say hi, I'm on Blue Sky. You can just search Sam Pratt. I'm just at sampratt.bsky.social. I'm also on Discord as Samp6 if you want to reach out to me there. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for listening and see you next week.